First, though, with the time at 5 minutes after 12, Brian Coleman, the chairman of the London Fire and Emergency Planning Authority, joins me in the studio. I think, by way of context, we should probably establish why. Yesterday, of course, the independent arbitrator handed down 2 options for firefighters' proposed shift changes. The FBU will ballot on one or other or both of those, and the results will see the beginning of the end game, hopefully, of the ongoing dispute. My colleague James Whale interviewed Brian yesterday afternoon, shortly after the news came out, and I must confess I was bringing my children home from school at the time on a bicycle, so I didn't catch the exchange. But lest you fall into the same category, here's a little reminder.
Now, you've been in discussions with Boris about or I should ask whether you have, I imagine you have, but I just want to know, have you been in discussions with Boris about your proposed cuts that my colleague James O'Brien initially put to the Mayor?
I am in close contact with the Mayor of London on a regular basis, and there's not a tissue paper, despite James O'Brien attempting to create some sort of chasm between the Mayor and I know that I've got to take £60 million out of the fire budget over the next 4 years. That's going to be very difficult to do. But like the police budget, the transport budget, and every other public sector budget in London, there are going to be cuts. And that's never been a secret. And anyone who's read the CSR report from the government will know that London's going to lose 60 million of fire grant.
Well, I don't know that my colleague was trying to cause a chasm. He was just trying to get to the truth of the story.
The
story...
Any other colleague other than James O'Brien, I can believe that, but not James O'Brien.
Right.
I have to say, James O'Brien...
Brian... No, you want to slag him off, you go and slag him off on his own programme, not
here.
Well,
no, he doesn't want me on his show.
Brian, I'm sure he'd love to talk to you any time. You are, after all, the chairman of the London Fire Emergency and Planning Authority.
He's a responsible broadcaster.
I mean, many invitations had been submitted, some of which we have recorded on email, none of which were taken up. And, of course, everybody in London knows that the phone lines are permanently open. But finally, Mr. Coleman joins me in the studio at your insistence, Brian.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yes,
on your show, yes.
You didn't want to conduct the interview over the phone.
I always think these things are better done face-to-face, don't you?
Well, possibly, yes, although 500,000 Londoners are quite happy to engage in the normal rules of phone-in broadcasting.
Well, I just wanted you to say all those things you've been saying on your show about me to my face. I thought that was the way to do it, really.
Well, that's absolutely fine. I imagine, and as my colleague James Whale tried to stress there, I am more interested in getting to the truth of the question of cuts, which has informed the entire debate, than I am in having any sort of form of personal exchange with you. But I imagine the most offensive thing I've said about you is that the only rationale I can see for your treatment of firefighters in this city is some sort of fetishistic desire to ape the relationship of Margaret Thatcher with the NUM and other trade unions. So unless there's anything else that you want to sort of me to say to your face, that should cover it.
Well, that's complete nonsense, isn't it? You have to have a villain in all these things, and it makes good broadcasting that you've got a villain and you've chosen me, and that's fine. I'm reasonably relaxed. But to paint me as some sort of, Thatcherite pantomime villain is just missing the point of the dispute we're in the middle of.
I agree, and it was something that I was left to do in the absence of being able to discern any other point, because from the moment that the industrial action was announced, this to me has been a question of trust. Can you now tell me categorically that this time next year there will be the same number of fire appliances on the streets of London and the same number of firefighters crewing them as there are today?
Of course not. And no politician can guarantee the level of public service they're providing. But the dispute about shifts has not been about cuts, James. And if you've read the independent arbitrator's report, which I'm sure, which is available on the website, you will see that he knows it's not about cuts, and he's come up with some suggested solutions which are nothing to do with cuts.
Every firefighter that contacted me told me that they accept there will be needs for shift changes. They will be uncomfortable accepting
I have to say that wasn't the union's position, James.
I'm talking about my programme. I'm talking about real firefighters, not necessarily the union leadership, although they, of course, are free, and indeed one of them already has done what you declined to do, picked up the phone and called in. Every single firefighter told me that their concern and their fear was that this would be a precursor to cuts. Yourself and Ron Dobson, I won't insult your intelligence by citing the occasions, have categorically and repeatedly stated to London that cuts were not on the agenda. I was not seeking to strike a chasm between you and Mayor Boris Johnson when I drew to his attention your call for an inquiry into whether or not London can be adequately protected in the absence of the 27 appliances that remain out of normal operational service. I was simply seeking to establish the facts, something that Boris Johnson subsequently did in conversation apparently with you.
Well, I have talked to the chairman of LFIPA about this matter, as I undertook to do, I think, to a radio reporter, a radio journalist, asked me to intervene with Brian, mention the matter to Brian, and I am assured that there are no plans for reductions in frontline services.
So you could give him a categorical answer to the question.
Sorry, I have to say, do you think any of this has been done without clearance through the Mayor's office, clearance through the Minister for Fire?
So Boris is being disingenuous.
Do you think I'm a daft enough politician that I haven't got all my ducks in a row? Do you think I make these things up on the spur of the moment? Do you think that's the way the Fire Authority operate? Because it isn't. Because we plan and discuss and we ask for reports from officers all the time. Is it a secret that there's got to be 60 million taken out of the Fire Authority budget? No, that's no secret. Hasn't been since the spending review result and the letter from the Minister. Boris knows as well as I do that the fire grant is being cut by 25% over 4 years. And, that's 60 million out of the London budget. And that's straightforward. So there's always going to be cuts, but the particular dispute about shift patterns is nothing to do with cuts and nothing to do with some sort of plan to cut night cover, because there is no such plan.
I'm beginning to understand why you were so keen to conduct this conversation in the studio rather than over the phone, because it's impossible to interrupt you once you get into a full... For 7 questions I counted there, none of which really merit a proper answer until you answer mine, which is, when Boris Johnson stated in front of the London Assembly that you had assured him there were no cuts in the offing, in cuts to the service, no prospect of cuts to the service, either he was deliberately misleading us, or you had deliberately misled him, or you're in cahoots with each other in a conspiracy to mislead everybody. I'm not quite clear what you're talking about, your ducks being in a row, Brian.
There's no secrets here. The 60 million figure that's got to be taken out of the budget is in the public domain and is being discussed openly at Fire Authority meetings and Fire Authority committee meetings, and being discussed with the Mayor and of course, the government.
There seems to be a sort of a grey area between the notion of £60 million and the existence of fire appliances and firefighters. And this is in no way meant to be an implicit or explicit criticism, but I would just ask you to listen to what the Mayor said to the London Assembly again, and then allow me to ask you a question about it, rather than you asking me rhetorical questions about whether or not you're acting in isolation or with the full support of the Mayor, who, when I spoke to him about it, didn't know what I was talking about.
Well, I have talked to the chairman of LFIPA about this matter, as I undertook to do, I think, to a radio reporter, a radio journalist, asked me to intervene with Brian, mention the matter to Brian, and I am assured that there are no plans for reductions in frontline services.
There are no plans for reductions in frontline services, I am assured by Brian, i.e. you, says Boris, i.e. the Mayor. Is he telling the truth?
The Mayor is fully aware of the budget pressures on the Fire Authority, as on the Police Authority and every other part of his empire. So, none of this is a surprise to the Mayor.
Is he telling the truth?
The Mayor is always telling the truth.
So there are no prospects of cuts in frontline services?
Of course there are prospects of cuts in frontline services.
You assured him that there wasn't. Let's just listen one more time.
No, I'm not playing this game. Not playing this game. The Mayor is fully aware. It is a game. It's a game that you're playing, James. I'm sorry, by constantly playing the same clip.
Well,
the Mayor is fully aware.
The words that the rest of us are hearing.
That the Mayor is fully aware of the budget pressures on the Fire Authority, as is his office. There was a meeting last week with senior members of the Mayor's office and senior officers of my authority to discuss how we get the fire budget within the spending regime.
This isn't really helpful, but I'm going to stay with it until I get an answer in the affirmative or the negative. The Mayor of London tells the London Assembly that you have assured him there will be no cuts and there are no prospect of cuts to frontline services. Would you tell Londoners the truth?
The truth is there are going to be £60 million of cuts to the Fire Authority budget over the next 4 years. The details are still being worked out. When the Mayor presents his final budget to Londoners, which will be just before Christmas for consultation, then Londoners will see the extent of the cuts or not that have got to be made across the board in the services that City Hall provides. And there are inevitably going to be changes and cuts in the fire service, and many of those are out there. When you think that something like 85% of our budget is staff costs and costs of premises, well, it's not rocket science to deduce that there have got to be changes in service provision.
I sense a clearing of the clouds. You are now categorically...